Hello everybody, before I get into the main topic of this video, I do want to say that I do have a bunch of other videos coming out over the next few days up until the end of September. A couple of interesting ideas lined up, so be on the lookout for those because I've got a few ideas rattling around in my head of videos I want to make, so I want to knock those out as soon as possible. But this video is going to be a little sad, as most of you probably know by this point. Earlier in this week, we lost a true wrestling legend in Bobby the Brain Heenan, who, as many have said, is arguably the greatest manager in the history of the business, one of the greatest color commentators in the history of the business, and one of the most entertaining personalities that professional wrestling has ever produced. All statements that I agree with. Bobby was a big part of me becoming a wrestling fan very early in my life. Starting at age, 5 or 6 when I started watching this stuff. And he's one of the guys that I really credit to really adding to my enjoyment of pro wrestling to the point where I would continue watching it as an art form and enjoying the art form for pretty much the rest of my life. So I can credit Bobby Heenan with a lot of that. And you know, it's always sad to see the great ones go, and Bobby's like, this one kind of stings a little bit, losing Bobby. It's not a huge surprise given how poor his health had been ever since he had throat cancer back in '04, I think it was, and his life has pretty much been a struggle ever since. But you know, back when he was around, and especially in the WWF in the '80s, and he had various other runs in other companies prior to going to the WWF. I remember seeing a bunch of his stuff from the AWA where he was managing Nick Bockwinkel and guys like that. But in the WWF, he really shined through like nobody's business. Like one of the most entertaining personalities, entertaining characters, whatever, that has ever been around in pro wrestling. And everybody talks about what a great manager he was. He, to me, is the textbook prototypical manager. Like, everything that a wrestling manager should be, Bobby Heenan was. If you need a guy to speak for somebody, Bobby could do that. He could cut promos like nobody's business and really knew what to say, how to say it, and to really get his guys over. To me, he's really the unsung hero of the Andre the Giant heel turn in '87 to set up WrestleMania 3. Go back and watch that Piper's Pit segment where Andre turns on Hogan and basically sets up the match. It's Bobby who really has to speak for Andre, because Andre, for all his positive qualities, was not the greatest speaker in the world, so you had Bobby to really sell it. And when he starts going into, you know, just railing into Hogan, going, it's like, you used this man, you hid behind him, you stole his spotlight, and, you know, just pointing the finger in Hogan's face and all of that other stuff. It was all very powerful and very well done, and Heenan really could sell that type of stuff and tell those type of stories. And it wasn't just Andre. There's various other guys that he managed over the years, like the Hercules and the Big John Studs of the world, and those type of talents. Bobby could make those guys look even better just for speaking for them. Guys like Hercules, probably not the greatest speaker, but you got Bobby to do that. Haku, very tough talent, very legit talent, not the best speaker in the world. You got Bobby to do that for him. Big John Studd, great look, not the best talker. You got Bobby to talk for him. And that's a very important component to have with wrestling managers, and something that the WWE is sorely missing today. Where they just kind of assume that all the wrestlers can talk, so they just let them all talk, when some guys would be better off not talking or get a manager to speak for them. And I don't know why they got away from that, but it is what it is. I'm just saying it worked for Ivan Drago. I'm just saying. It's not like there's no precedent for this. It works when you do it right. Ivan Drago, keep it short and sweet, let the wife speak for him, and then we're all good. But yeah, Bobby was just so good at selling matches and selling the talents. And even for guys that he was with that he didn't need to speak for, Rick Rude, pretty good at promos. Mr. Perfect, excellent at promos. Kurt Hennig was an excellent talker. He didn't need Heenan to speak for him. But he brought that level of credibility. If you put somebody with Bobby it would immediately get people's attention. Now, not all of them worked, like the Red Rooster, but putting Bobby with somebody lent a lot of credibility to that talent and really put them over the map. And it took somebody like Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, who was already getting his foot in the door and had all the tools, but just putting him with Bobby really gave him that extra push, that extra boost to really solidify him as a top talent. So Bobby just made the guys he worked with even better. And he also helped out the baby faces that he was working against. Hogan, he gave Hogan somebody to beat up on. You know, he would cheat and cheat and cheat and send all these guys after Hogan and just do all these other things. And then when Hogan would finally get his hands on him and beat him up, it was satisfying. When he tripped up Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 5 in one of the most famous, like, screwjob heel finishes ever, you know, held down Warrior's feet on the suplex and got Rude the Intercontinental title. Warrior beat him up, and that was satisfying. And, you know, we had all those weasel suit matches. It gave Warrior an antagonist that wasn't just... It was kind of like Superman and Lex Luthor, where Bobby was the brain, pun intended, and guys like Hogan and Warrior were the muscle, and... you know, Bobby would be like the chess master, like putting all the pawns in place to try and beat those guys. But when they would finally get to him, he'd be no match for him, and they'd just get tossed around. But yeah, Bobby was just a great manager, and he could bump too and sell and do all sorts of other things. So whenever they would put their hands on him, it would be awesome, and he would get roughed up like crazy. And you know, so he really knew how to sell those beatings as well, and that was all terrific. But the other part of Bobby that was also fantastic was his work as a color commentator, specifically his work with Gorilla Monsoon, who those two had unbelievable chemistry together. It's really unreal, like, how natural they seemed together and how naturally funny they were together. They were like wrestling's equivalent to, like, Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy or, you know, they were just a great comedy duo. And... they worked flawlessly together, and because they were so good together, you know, I mean, they really, when I think of the all-time great commentary teams, Monsoon and Heenan are one of the teams that come to mind. I mean, it's them, Monsoon and Ventura, Gordon Soley and virtually anybody he worked with, and JR and the King. Those are the all-time great commentary teams in my mind when I think of great commentary teams. And Heenan and Monsoon, they were the funniest, without a doubt. If you don't agree that they were the best, I think most people would agree that they were probably the funniest. They just had, like, these running bits that would go on that would make even the most boring, pointless matches worth watching, because, you know, you're watching superstars and it's a lot of squash matches, but you get Heenan and Monsoon, or at least Heenan, just cracking wise and just making jokes, making pointless matches entertaining. Actually, when he was in WCW, he did the same thing. Somebody sent me a video of a match that he called in WCW. It was for one of the Saturday night shows, and it was Hacksaw Jim Duggan in a squash match. And Heenan, Shivani makes a joke, or not a joke, but he makes a comment about how intelligent Duggan is and that he's college educated. This prompts Bobby Heenan to literally laugh his ass off the entire match, and it is hysterical. It is one of the best calls for a Hacksaw Jim Duggan match I've ever seen. And it was just, Bobby could take pointless matches and just make them entertaining just by being funny. And again, going back to his work with Monsoon, when I say that they were like a great comedy duo, part of what made it so funny was that Monsoon sounded legitimately pissed at Heenan when they would be at the booth together, which was great, and which made it even better. And he wasn't. I mean, I was actually so happy to learn later on, when I got on the internet and started seeing shoot interviews and stuff. I really liked to know that Monsoon and Heenan were actually really close friends and really liked each other. And I was like, oh, that's good to know. Because on camera, it seemed like they legitimately despised each other. And that's what made it so funny. It didn't feel forced. I think that's part of the problem with commentary teams today, when you've got Vince McMahon yelling inside your headset to say this and say that and push this and push that. you can't really build chemistry with anybody because you're just reciting whatever the boss wants you to recite, and nothing feels natural or spontaneous. I think back to WrestleMania when Shane dived off the cage, and you see Michael Cole sitting there reading off the script, reacting to it. And I think it's like, dude, somebody just dived off a cage. Get a natural reaction out of that. You don't need to, calls like that should be spontaneous. You can't force that. And that's what Heenan and Monsoon felt like. It felt like a lot of their riffs and their jokes and their back and forths were always very spontaneous and natural. One of my personal favorites was at WrestleMania 8. The show was in Indiana, so naturally Bobby Heenan had to make some kind of a joke about the famed college basketball coach Bobby Knight. And Heenan made some kind of a crack where he said, Monsoon in his typical bit would say something like, if you don't stop, I'll have you thrown out of here. And Bobby said something like, oh, I'll have you thrown out of here. They love me here. I'm Indiana's favorite Bobby. And Monsoon pauses and then just goes, you couldn't hold Bobby Knight's towel. And Heenan, without missing a beat, goes, who? It was just classic stuff like that. It was just a really, really funny and clever bit. And they would have all types of great stuff like that. I also think part of the dynamic of why Bobby works so well at the booth, and a part of the problem with commentary teams today, whenever they try to have a heel announcer, they try to force a heel announcer. It's like they just kind of have it in their head. It's like, all right, one of them has to be a heel because we need heel commentators and blah, 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 blah. And that's why that's how you get situations like the Michael Cole stuff, which, whatever, or like in TNA when they turned Don West heel for some reason. They try to recreate that dynamic. The problem, though, if you look at the great heel commentators like Jerry Lawler, like Jesse Ventura, and like Bobby Heenan, they were pre-existing characters that were already heel. So they weren't just like filling the role of a heel commentator. They were commentators that were already heel. So it was very natural for them. It was just Ventura, Heenan, and Lawler calling the matches as they naturally would. And given what we know about them being assholes, they just called the matches like they normally would. And it felt very natural for them to do that. They didn't just flip a switch. It's like, all right, Lawler, you're heel commentator now. Or Ventura, you're heel commentator now. And just just favor all the heels and hate all the faces. It wasn't like that. They just called the matches like how you would expect them to call the matches. And that's why those guys work so well and why other attempts at heel commentators don't really work. Again, I already mentioned Don West and Michael Cole, but I'm thinking inside my head of all the great Monsoon and Heenan commentary bits. I've mentioned before, my favorite three-man team of all time was at SummerSlam 91. It was Piper, Monsoon, and Heenan. And as far as I can remember, they only did that team once, and I don't know why, because it was flipping great. The back and forths and the bouncing off each other that those three had together was incredible. And they really added a lot to that show. I wish they had done that team a lot more, but Heenan just always funny, always great, and he could really sell stuff too. Everybody says that the best call he ever had was at Royal Rumble '92, where Ric Flair, a guy that the character Bobby Heenan had a personal investment in, ultimately won the match, and Heenan had to sell that he was favoring Flair the entire match, and it probably was his greatest call. He was just amazing the entire match. He was great. And when he did have those personal investments in a guy like a Ric Flair or like a Lex Luger, his calls were just even better because the character had a personal investment in what was going on. So all of that was great, and Heenan also did a lot of great comedy bits in the WWE. One that really sticks out to me was on one of the old Coliseum videos, where they would do a lot of strange things on the Coliseum videos. I distinctly remember one, just to reference how strange some of these were. It was Invasion 92, and they did like a Star Trek parody where Sean Mooney was like the Captain Kirk of the WWF Starship, and they were watching matches on the view screen, and Ric Flair like hacked the feed and was like communicating with them through the telescreen and going woo and all sorts of other strange things. It was very weird, and the Coliseum video things like that. They did some very, very strange stuff. But in Rampage 91, which is probably one of my more, when I was a kid, it was one of my more favorite ones to watch for these two reasons. One, they did a visit with Paul Bearer's home, where we go inside Paul Bearer's house and basically just have a day with Paul Bearer. And he's like going around his kitchen and his winery or whatever, and he's like, oh, I think I'll have a Bloody Mary. Or do I want a Bloody Tom? Or a Bloody Michael? Oh no, I'll settle for a Bloody Mary. And even as a kid, I was watching this like, what the fuck is going on? He would open like a cabinet, like the hand of a cadaver would fall out, and all sorts of other strange shit like that. It was basically like WWF's attempt at like a haunted house bit, but it was really, really strange. But also on Rampage 91, they had golf tips from Gene Okerlund and Bobby the Brain Heenan. So it was basically just Gene Okerlund and Bobby Heenan on a golf course just getting up to shenanigans, where I got to watch Bobby Heenan cheat at golf, which is great, and I loved it. There was one point where he started using a ball retriever to hit the ball, and Gene Okerlund's like, what are you doing? Bobby, what are you doing? It's a ball retriever, you goof. And it was just, I don't know what it is about golf, but it's just ripe for comedy. If you look at things like Happy Gilmore and Caddyshack. And as a kid, my brothers and I, we grew up with the Dorf on Golf videos. I remember Dorf on Golf. There was, my personal favorite was the Mount Olympus one, but there was also Dorf's Golf Bible, which I also really liked. So, like the Dorf golf videos with Tim Conway, for those of you who don't know what that is, or who did the Dorf character, we thought that those bits were really funny. So to see like a WWF version of that was really funny to me as a kid. So it's just something else that Heenan did that gave me fond memories. And, you think back to all the other funny stuff he did, like the first episode of Raw where he kept trying to sneak into the building. Now, why an employee of the WWF would need to sneak into the building, I don't know. But, him constantly coming in with different disguises to try and sneak into the show was really funny. And his ultimate exit from the WWF, where Monsoon kicked him out, one of the more memorable exits in wrestling history, and a great send-off, a great goofy send-off for the legendary Bobby the Brain Heenan. He went on to WCW and was commentator over there and had some great stuff, but I'll always remember him for his work in the WWF, where I think a lot of his best material was. So, I actually remember, before WrestleMania kind of became like a glorified legend show, WrestleMania X7, I think a lot of people look at X8 as being the one that kind of started the nostalgia kick, because that was when Hogan showed up. But to me, it really kind of began with the Gimmick Battle Royal in 17. And I remember watching it, and here I am, jaded teenager in high school, watching this show, fully engrossed into the Attitude Era and everything that the Attitude Era had to offer. And I marked the fuck out when Bobby the Brain Heenan came out for the Gimmick Battle Royal to be the commentator, or to be the color commentator for that match. I didn't expect it. It was a total surprise, and it just put a big smile on my face just to see Bobby walk out there. I was like, it's Bobby! Yes! And Bobby back in the WWF just felt totally right. And it's a shame that his health failed after that, because you'd think they would have used him again and found other ways to incorporate Bobby Heenan into the programming. But, I just love Bobby, and I was sad to hear that he passed, but again, like I said, it wasn't unexpected, but it's still sad all the same. And, he was the wittiest, funniest, one of the most entertaining men that ever graced the art form of professional wrestling, and I thank him so much for all the great memories and all the great funny bits that he provided me and fans all over the world. So, Bobby Heenan, truly one of the greats. We'll never forget him. He was one of my favorites back in the day and still one of my favorites today. I look at him as a bit of a measuring stick for a lot of things, whether it be wrestling managers or color commentators. Bobby is one of the standard bearers in the history of the business, and I was just fortunate enough to get to watch him and to be entertained by him. So once again, thank you so much, Bobby Heenan, for everything that you gave to the business and to the fans, and you will be missed without a doubt.